Article 22 is a social impact jewelry company that partners with artisans in Laos to take bomb scrap metal and turn it into works of wearable art. I speak to the company's founder, Elizabeth Suda. The majority of profits from Article 22 sales helps MAG, the Mines Advisory Group, to clear unexploded ordnances in Laos. Suda's path to creating Article 22 started with her efforts to understand the impact of fashion on people and the environment.
Fashion was really a kind of second step for my art history background in university. It was my first job in New York City, and I really wanted to learn a little bit about business, and fashion was an interesting lens to do that through. It's very practical, people wear it, and I started to think about sustainability and the environment and fashion and how those things interacted, given the fact that the products we buy often come from so far away. You know, we start to really care about what we put into our body, but what about what we put on our body? So fashion was my starting point. It got me really thinking a lot about what we buy, where the things we buy come from. And I started a little internet research and started reading about natural dyes and handloom weaving. And I had this suspicion that there was something in the past about heritage techniques, about, making beautiful blue indigos from leaves and a bright fuchsia from a resin produced by a bug, could inform our modern way of producing and creating fashion. What could the past teach us right now about creating a more, let's say, sustainable fashion?
In 2008, Suda traveled to Laos to learn from the local craftswomen there. Beyond lessons about the country's textiles, she gained insight into the secret war, the first time she'd ever heard about this history. So how do you land in Laos? Is that like the next stage then, or?
That's exactly the next stage. I was a wanderlust traveler, let's say with a purpose. That's what I told my friends and family, who thought it was kind of crazy that I was leaving this wonderful, wonderful company. And I just couldn't help myself because I really needed to see firsthand the incredible weavers that I had read about, who were learning the technique from generations of aunties and mothers and grandmothers. I wanted to understand what story those weavings told, and also how possibly we could integrate them into a global market. I was very curious about the nexus of design and economic development and kind of the secret heritage that women's artistry carried. And so I get to Laos, prepared, without a plan, start knocking on doors. And I am warmly embraced by this pioneering woman who, in the 1990s, set up her own business, started having weavers come to her house, work on handloom, looms, would have children, taking naps as their mothers made these gorgeous textiles that she would then sell in Europe, where she had some connections, where she had been to school. So this pioneering woman was really making a huge impact in her local community, and also bringing these Lao textiles to the global market in a very luxurious and meaningful way for the artistry and for the heritage of this particular art form.
How does that get to cluster munitions and learning about the secret war? Is it just conversations you start to have then?
That's exactly right. So one of these conversations led me to the north, Siangkwang. And there I was working with a Swiss NGO called Helvetas on a consulting project to understand how these 4 villages that the NGO had just connected through hydropower could use that hydropower by expanding their working day a little bit, allowing them to have light to perhaps weave for the upcoming tourist industry that was going to be growing as a result of this incredible archaeological site called the Plain of Jars. The Plain of Jars today is now a World Heritage Site that does bring and attract many tourists, not just the ones that go to Vientiane and Luang Prabang. And it's a very special place. And so they thought, well, what can we do with these talented women who make these textiles? Can we create something for these tourists who are coming here? And while I was in these 4 villages, I couldn't help myself, and I always like to connect the dots. And I said, well, what else do you make here? And a woman grabs my hand, one of the weavers, and brings me to a shed. She opens the door, and I see detritus on the floor, and I'm not really sure what it is, but very deliberately, she picks up one piece of jagged metal that she recognizes has characters in English that I might understand. And they say rocket mortar. And suddenly, all of these tidbits that I had heard but not fully understood tied together. And I realized that this was a detonated piece of shrapnel, a detonated bomb from the United States that was dropped during the Vietnam War. Of course, very quickly, I realized it was not called the Vietnam War in Laos. It was called the American War. And it was at that moment that, as a curious traveler, I realized the power of stepping out of your comfort zone. Because to me, the Vietnam War ended in 1975. And the American War, despite my having studied history, was not something that I had learned. And I, within 24 hours of spending time in that village, started to research and realized that there were still 80 million unexploded bombs in the ground. This very village itself was contaminated. And when I talked to more and more villagers, I realized that their village was a battleground. That disconnect between a history book date and the reality of a post-conflict landscape really made me feel like I couldn't unsee it, I couldn't unknow it, and I needed to do something about it.
Article 22's jewelry is sold in more than 40 countries. In addition to helping to clean up unexploded bombs, each piece sold is also an opportunity to talk about the history.
So advocacy, as well as jewelry, it's playing to your strengths, but also it makes you sleep well at night knowing that, I'm doing something as well, having witnessed what you did. So can you talk about the advocacy piece and the importance of it?
The thing with the problem of 80 million UXO that are active in the land in Laos is that there's really no big business solution to fix it. It is a humanitarian concern that requires true collaboration between the public and private sector, individual donors, valiant nonprofits like Legacies of War, and governments. That includes the Lao government, the American government, and other donor governments that provide the funds to make this land safe for generations to come. So when it comes to Article 22, we have always taken this approach of being able to use the jewelry as a tool to engage new audiences. Jewelry is something that always has a certain degree of meaning if it's handed down, if it's something from your own, grandmother's jewelry chest. And in this case, the jewelry that we create is remade. It's refashioned from a weapon into something positive, something that actually has a tangible utility in the way that it raises money for our friends at Legacies of War, and the way it raises money for Mines Advisory Group to demine the land. And advocacy through conscious commerce has always been the core reason we do what we do. It's creating land that's clear for generations to come, even if that land is a small patch. Those people who now can farm it with peace of mind have their lives transformed. In the case of the artisans who make our jewelry, the advocacy is really about telling their story in a way that gives them agency. The people who are most affected by the problem are agents of change in the process. One thing that's always made me very happy is to have been able to bring storytellers and journalists and collaborators to the village to interview the artisans, to get them to tell their own story. And I think one key of Article 22 is the fact of collaboration being about doing what you do and letting the partner organizations that you work with do what they do best. Legacies of War informs Article 22's constituents of the hard facts. Article 22's constituents then become storytellers by wearing the jewelry and telling about the work that goes into advocating on Capitol Hill, or the work that goes into Mines Advisory Group clearing unexploded bombs from the land.
In Article 22, talk to us about the name.
Yeah. So Article 22 is named after the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 22 specifically is everyone's right to social, economic, and cultural security and the free development of personality. And to me, this is really the definition of what is sustainability. It's missing the environmental piece. But this is what we do at Article 22. We balance the fact that we are upcycling, removing shrapnel and scrap from the land. We are making it into something that is more valuable and meaningful and has continued impact through donations. The artisans that we work with are working from home as multidimensional humans who have, children and who are subsistence farmers, but who are also creating jewelry that is allowing them to build foundations on their homes and making a real difference in their lives. And culturally, they are doing this in a way that tells their unique story about a part of history that was not known.
One final question. You talked about meaningful, important, taking darkness, creating light out of it, which clearly that's part of your mission as well. Talk to me about where you are today and where you'd like to be maybe 5 or 10 years from now in terms of your own legacy with this jewelry and the impact that it can make.
A lot of companies out there say, oh, well, we're donating 100% of our profits. But with the way we've built Article 22 and our model, we donate for every single piece that's sold. So no matter what, there's a guarantee that Mines Advisory Group and Legacies of War are benefiting to support their work, to advance their advocacy, to bring together the collaboration that's required to address this insurmountable problem, this problem that would otherwise be insurmountable. So my hope is that the generations of artisan makers in Laos continue to grow their businesses with Article 22 and to realize that they are agents of change and that they are responsible for clearing the unexploded ordnance that's in their land because they have been part of the process. One story is one of our artisan farmers, Lay and Siton. They were part of the older generation that started making the soup spoons. And for 40 years, they farmed their rice fields, knowing that there was unexploded ordnance. Lay and Siton had 8 children. And so every single planting and harvest, they would go out knowing that they had to be extra careful. And in 2014, Mines Advisory Group, with the help of Article 22 jewelry sales made by this very community, removed 400 unexploded bombs from their land. That is an unfathomable amount of unexploded ordnance. And it's unfathomable for any parent to imagine engaging your children in tilling your land, knowing that this land is contaminated, but having no choice because that's what you have to do to eat. So these artisans are part of a virtuous circle that is making impact for generations to come.
Yeah, it's a great story. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.